Hi everyone, it's Don. Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about writing your best personal statement and the best tips I have for you to write a personal statement, whether it's for medical school or specifically in this case, residency. Also in the second half of this video, I am going to be showing you in detail the personal statement that I used last year to apply to general surgery, which got me successfully matched to this school, so that you can see my thought process and see why I chose to include some things and exclude some other details. And the reason I'm showing you this is because I do share my personal statement to a lot of people who ask me about tips on writing it and where to get started. And they do appreciate having that inspiration and just a little bit of direction on where to start. And so obviously this video is not meant to show off my personal statement. I am proud of what I put out because I did put a lot of time, effort into it. And even now, reading it 1 year later, I do think that it is very representative of my motivations and my personality. So I did want to show you that so that you can be inspired if you need it. So if you're really just interested in seeing me reviewing that personal statement, you can click right here and I'll timestamp where that part of the video starts. Otherwise, we'll just start with my general tips for writing your best personal statement. So my first tip is actually to not be afraid to read other personal statements that you can find online or from people that you know. I know that first I was trying to make my own thing, trying to come up with my own statement so that it wasn't plagiarized or too much influenced by things I was reading online. So I tried avoiding that, but later in the writing process, I did go online just to look at what other people have put out. And so there's a lot of statements that are available for free online if you just Google personal statement with the specific thing you're applying for. And you can see what you like, what you don't like, and inspire yourself from those things. And honestly, it didn't really happen at all that I was like, oh, I love this sentence, I'm gonna include it in my own, because I didn't want to lie. I wanted to make my personal statement sound like my own, so I always made sure that the wording I used and the idea I put out was for sure my own. There's other obvious basic tips that I don't really want to talk too much about in this video, but things like making it very personal by sharing your own personal stories and experiences is very important. And generally using confident language and a convincing tone in your statement is very important, but I feel like those things are quite basic. One thing I personally tried to always do was to answer the prompt using the first and last paragraph of your statement, regardless of how long the body is. So obviously I try to keep it short and interesting so that the reader doesn't lose attention, but I want to make sure that my first paragraph and last paragraph, if that were the only paragraphs that the reader were to read, that they would be impressed and convinced and have a general idea of what my entire statement says. So if you were to take out the entire middle part, I did want my first and last paragraph to make a lot of sense and to be powerful. My next tip is to write it early and let it simmer and take time and review it every so often. I know that I'm a slow writer and that I can't put out a full text in just a few hours. So what I did was go really one step at a time, which was writing just a basic outline, writing all the paragraphs that I wanted to discuss, and even going as far as to writing 1 or 2 sentences a day, just so that they're very well worded and I'm happy with them. And because I started writing it weeks in advance, I did have a lot of time to review it and go back to it and make sure that I was expressing things the way I wanted to. Especially just reading your statement 1 week after writing it, you'll see that there's a lot of things that stand out and that you might want to change just a little. And obviously these things might be minor and that your statement probably wouldn't be entirely different, though sometimes it does happen that you do want to change an entire paragraph. It's just nice to be able to be really proud of what you're putting out and have something that you think is refined for a statement that is basically talking about your own life. And my last tip is to get it proofread by someone who's very, very proficient in English. I studied in French a lot of my life, and I did do medical school in English, but writing text in English isn't necessarily my biggest strength, especially that French structure of language and syntax is just a little bit different and might sound a little bit weird even if I use the right words in English. So there's a lot of proofreading services that are dedicated to medical school applications, but I chose to go on Fiverr.com, and there's a lot of proofreading services that are extremely cheap and have very fast turnover time, so you can send it to them and they give it back to you in about 2 days sometimes, and the quality is extremely high because these people usually have degrees and diplomas and they've been doing this professionally. And the fact that they're not necessarily people who are on medical school committees or who know much about what it requires to be a doctor or a resident, it's actually quite nice that they don't have that bias and they can give you their honest first impressions reading your text. And so I found the feedback that I received from there to be extremely valuable, and I do recommend it to anyone because it is substantially cheaper than the dedicated services for medical school personal statements that are charging like, you know, 50, $100 for a letter. So those are my basic tips for writing a personal statement, and I'm going to try to dive into a bit more detail about my thought process and other tips while reading what I wrote. So let's go. All right, so this is my personal statement. Obviously, it is a personal statement, so it does always sound a bit cheesy, a bit braggy because you're trying to sell yourself, but just keep that in mind and try not to judge. I'm trying to be really helpful here, so hopefully you can get something out of it. So it's Times New Roman size 11, and it's just at the bottom of one page, and it's 776 words, which I think is the perfect length. And so just going over the first paragraph, you see that I'm trying to be very, very concise here, saying that the work of a surgeon epitomizes how I wish to impact the lives of others. And I did want to be fully responsible for patients and by carrying out definitive treatments myself, which again, with a lot of subspecialties, it's going to be something that is, you come in for the problem and you kind of just treat it, but you don't really admit the patient and the patient isn't under your service, but general surgery tends to have that. Just to go back to that point, that my first paragraph answers the question of why I want to be a surgeon, which I develop later. And as I was saying earlier, I want my last paragraph to also be very strong and use very powerful wording to catch the attention, but also if that's the last thing that they read and that they blank out in the middle, they will at least know this. So just to go straight to my last paragraph, I'm saying, to conclude, my previous experiences and current skills will allow me to become the resident I wish to be, an avid learner for my mentors, a respected physicians for my patients, and a role model for medical students, which I think that's very important actually, this here. I really like how I worded this, honestly. It really represents what I think a resident is, being a trainee, a real doctor to patients, consider you a real doctor, and just generally being a role model for medical students. So I'm quite happy about how I worded this, and I've gotten good comments about this. Now to kind of go through the general structure of it, see I have just 4 paragraphs in the middle here, all of which have a thesis and supporting sentences and a concluding sentence, which brings in the next paragraph, and it flows actually quite well. And I'll try to make a link or just paste it all in the description so you can have a read for yourself. This is more just with an overview and a little bit of a thought process. So I did want to immediately hook the reader with why I have unique skills or why I'm a little bit different, and that's because of dexterity and discipline. I really think that what I've learned in the past in terms of manual crafts and manual skills set me apart. Whether that is important or not for surgery, that is up to the reader to decide, but my goal is to convince them that these skills are really what enables me to be a good surgeon. And so I do start off with a personal story, which I think is always very important, just to stand out and to make it a little bit more unique and interesting, especially if they're reading thousands of these, or just a dozen more realistically. So I do start off just saying, my mom taught me a single crochet when I was 12, and I made a ton of beanies, and I I progressed more and more. And that's a common theme when as I'm going to explain here too, that I'm trying to show that I progress to an independent level, that it's not just hobbies that I do, but that I always take them quite far. And as I say here, having mastered the fundamentals, I design, plan, and execute complex crochet artwork independently. And I'm proud of that, and I think that's something that stands out in my experiences. But not only that, is that I've done the same for magic. I learned a lot of the stuff myself. And as I say here, I quickly advanced in the difficulty of tricks and eventually sought mentorship at the Ottawa Society of Magicians. And again, I'm just showing that I progressed to the point where I was confident enough to perform to a lot of people. And I even drop here that sometimes I did do it to some patients, which are some of my best performances and best memories of medical school, honestly, and for small events. I'm not saying here that I was a big professional or that I was, David Copperfield, but I do want to just say that I brought a hobby to somewhere I thought I would be good at. And here I just finish off by saying that I'm confident that my technical skills will make me an excellent trainee, which is the whole point of this basically, is that I say that I can learn surgery because I've done other technical skills in the past, and that's proof. And I do acknowledge here that dexterity is an asset for surgery, but more importantly, I developed the discipline to learn and progress, which I would say is the most important skill that I developed learning all these things, because as I explain here, this is how I do it. This is the way I progress in my hobbies. And so again, I transition from this saying that I have this discipline that I use this to thrive in surgery. So all the electives I did just to show that I'm committed to the career, and I also just have experience in working with surgeons, and I understand what the field is really like. And then I really just go into why general surgery, which of course is a very important question and should be answered. But I didn't spend too much time on it. I really just tried to have the salient points from it. So I'm saying here that it's basically being a jack of all trades, because you just operate on a lot of different things. You operate on the whole body almost, or during your training at least, and different techniques too, from open surgeries to laparoscopic surgeries, and that's really is what I like about general surgery. And here I show why I wanted to come here, and again, it's using a small story to keep the attention and make it a little bit unique. So I saw David Blaine's live show when he was here, and it was really a beautiful performance, and I really loved it, and it was a highlight from my time here on elective. And I'm just explaining here, it is a bit cheesy, but honestly it is real. He only went to Hamilton during that tour, and it was all the rest in the States, and he said that he just wanted people to hear about his show, and people would come to it naturally rather than having his name postered everywhere in a big city in Canada, and people would just show up because other people are, and so it makes it just smaller and personal, and that's the feel of Hamilton right now, and that does transmit in the culture of the hospital and people working there and the trainees. So basically that's entirely what I said, that I felt very comfortable in and outside the hospital right away. Also, just this quick word about the residency program, which stays quite general. This could be said about a lot of surgery programs, but it is something that is very important to me because they do have exposure to both academic and community surgery, and I think that's for me the most important thing. And so again, we already went over the conclusion, but make sure you have a very powerful conclusion, not necessarily trying to reiterate everything. Try to say something new, which is what I'm doing here. And if they need to reread anything, they will, so try not to be too redundant. And so I really worked on every single sentence I have in this text, rewording it so that every word is very high yield and expresses a lot. And I had it proofread so that things weren't redundant, and I wanted them to be the most well expressed as possible. Okay, so I really hope that this was helpful. I know I'm just kind of going through it and that you can read it yourself, but hopefully there's a bit of something that you can take out of it, and maybe it inspires you to start writing your own. And don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions, or leave your comments and feedback. I'd really appreciate that. If this video was helpful, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next one.